Welcome back, everybody. It's been a long time no see to the Warm Weather Fans Sunbelt podcast. My name is Brian. With me today is Zeke. If you've been a long time listener of the podcast, this is season 3 for us, Zeke, that we've been
Yeah,
doing this now.
this
Uh,
is season 3.
yeah.
That's
So our
crazy.
third chair, who's usually here with us, Matt Miguez, who actually invested in a very sweet audio mixer for the sake of the podcast, cannot actually make it this first 2 episodes this week,
Mhm.
um just due to life stuff. So that's totally fine, but we are here kicking off our 2025 Sunbelt previews, and as always we start from the teams that were the worst in the conference last year and we kind of build our way up, which will be very interesting because some of the teams that were at the top,
Mhm.
I mean, I don't want to step on the Marshall preview, but what's that going to be like? So
Right.
that's kind of going to be interesting. But Zeke, it's been a long time since we've been on the pod. How have you been before we jump into the your Georgia State Panthers here?
Yeah, I'm good. This is season 3. That means for the third straight season, I'm going to change where I'm recording out of. For this season, I started in my college apartment, went into my mom's basement. I've got my own place now. It's just me. It's a little lonely, but it's nice. I enjoy being here. So we'll see how long this setting sticks, and by next season, we'll find a fourth place to be recording. It's good to be back, man. It's a long off season. There's a lot of stuff going on. I think college football, house settlement was a big deal. I don't think it's something we're going to really touch on today, but I think that's something that is the biggest news out of college football from the off season. Per usual, or per has been the trend, I guess. Transfer portal just absolutely plundering all of the teams that we talk about on this show. I mean, if you look at last year's leaderboards from the Sun Belt, or you look at the award winners or the all conference teams, none of those guys are still around, and that's just going to continue being the trend for the next couple years, which is an adjustment, which is definitely an adjustment, but it's something that we've been used to for a couple years, and again, it's just going to keep getting worse and worse. Make of that what you will. I think it's probably ultimately maybe a little bad for the sport, but I also have the small school bias coming into play, so I'm glad to be back. I'm glad to be here. I'm looking forward to getting Matt on here as soon as we can to play with his new toys. Brian got some new toys as well, with a sick new mic and the arm stand for the mic. When I was moving into this place, my mic stand broke. It lost a leg, so I'm going with the old hand today. I'm glad to be here, man.
Yeah, same. Yeah, as Zeke said, it's been a long time since we've done an episode. Originally, we were going to come back post NFL draft and try to talk through everybody that got drafted. But unfortunately, there just weren't that many people. So and frankly, there's with the legal situation stuff, there was only so much we were going to say about Mike Green.
Mm-hmm.
So, but peek behind the curtain. So sorry, everybody. That was, if you were waiting on that just never materialized. We typically have more than a couple drafted players that we can talk about, but we unfortunately just didn't really this year. It
Had
wasn't
the
it wasn't
one,
like a
yeah.
strong, it wasn't really a strong Sunbelt crop. So here we are. We are back. Zeke, typically the way that we do these previews, especially when it isn't one of our three teams, being Georgia Southern, Georgia State, or Louisiana, I typically drive the discussion based on the great Phil Steele's magazine. And we will have Phil back on the podcast this summer where we will pelt him with questions. But since we have you here and you are the
Mm-hmm.
Georgia State kind of aficionado of the pod, the idea is you kind of drive the discussion and then I will jump in with questions or want to know kind of where the team sits, things like that. So let's could we start a little bit just by talking about how 2024 went, year one for Dell McGee. Expectations understandably were not high. Although
Mhm.
if you listen to McGee toward the end of the year, I went back and re-listened to one of our old episodes. McGee had these weird comments toward the end of the year where he was expecting better attendance, better support from the school, I guess, and
Mhm.
he made some comments toward the end of last season that made it seem like he was a little disappointed in that. But yeah, there was a big segment we did last year that I went back and re-listened to where we basically said, I don't really know what he expected. And you kind of echoed that because you know what the deal is there in
Right.
Atlanta. So yeah, take us just briefly through 2024, kind of how the season went, how it progressed, things like that.
Yeah. So last year, very well, I guess we start 2 off seasons ago, very late into the off season, rapidly approaching spring football. Georgia State head coach Sean Elliott says, "I'm out. Deuces. I'm going to go take the offensive line job. I think it is at South Carolina." He
Mhm.
had South Carolina ties. Word on the street is that he was living in South Carolina his entire time, working for Georgia State. Weird situation, but notable because Sean Elliott, winning his coach in Georgia State history, won several bowl games with the team, and when by Georgia State football standards, was an excellent head coach for that team. So you're kind of scrambling late in the offseason. You get Dell McGee, who comes from the University of Georgia, about 2 hours east, obviously the more notable Georgia football team in the state. He was the running backs coach there. He had previously been in the Sun Belt working with Georgia Southern and was an interim head coach for them for a game. I think it was a bowl game, right?
It was the 2015 GoDaddy Bowl, their first ever bowl win in program history, because obviously we had been an FCS school up to that point and hadn't participated in bowl games because the FCS is a playoff system.
Mm-hmm.
And also came out, they beat Bowling Green. Um, that was a great time. They carried him off the field. Everybody assumed he would have been in the running for the head coaching job. And then Tom Kleinline galaxy brained us and decided that Tyson Summers was the way to go. And we all know how that ended. The one thing, too, I wanted to say about McGee's resume when he was at
Mm-hmm.
Georgia is his MO is a awesome A++ recruiter. Like, recruiting
Mm-hmm.
was his bag. I don't know if he was the head recruiter at Georgia, but he was up there among the best recruiters in the nation, not just at Georgia, where they were winning national championships and having great running backs come through constantly like a stream. He was, I mean, he was way up there in the recruiting ranks. So it was a big get just from a pedigree perspective, kind of
Mm-hmm.
a shift in focus as far as what Georgia State wanted to do. It felt like, you may agree with this, you may not. Again, you pay more attention to the program than I do. It felt like Elliott never really put a stamp on what he wanted the team to be, because as an offensive line guy, you would assume, let's establish the run, let's be physical at the line of scrimmage. And sometimes they did that, and then sometimes it felt very like finesse.
Mm-hmm.
So it just literally depended. I mean, and sometimes it was a game to game thing where one game they would be physical and run for 200 plus yards, and then the next game they would try to be cute and throw the ball 50 times with, frankly, a quarterback that wasn't the most accurate guy in the country. So
Right.
it was just a strange thing where they didn't have a set identity. They were winning games, but they were never really in contention for the East. Anytime they
Mm-hmm.
felt like they were kind of building momentum, they'd shoot themselves in the foot or get beat really bad by somebody. And they were always good, not great. And so we had this talk a couple of years ago where we said, how many more years is Georgia State going to do this? Where, yes, he's the winningest coach in program history, but you're also not seeing a progression. It is wavering between being 6 to 8, or even fewer, 5 to 8 wins per season, and you just have no idea what you're going to get. So
Mm-hmm.
yeah, so take us through a little bit of last year, and then we'll transition and talk about this year.
Yeah, so the transition was pretty tough. You start off with Darren Granger, Marcus Carroll, both no longer with the program. Those were two big hits, especially on the offensive side. Marcus Carroll, who himself took over from Tucker Gregg, took Georgia State under Sean Elliott, had, again, how much they leaned on this was variable game to game and a disappointing flexibility in that, but they had a very strong offensive line room and a very strong running game with Darren Granger, Marcus Carroll, Tucker Gregg before that, and perennially one or two guys that were going to be at least in the conversation for first team all Sun Belt. Didn't matter who it was, you were going to have a couple guys like that. And frankly, they didn't follow up. Obviously, with the late transition, it was kind of too late. It was obviously too late to get any high school guys. Not that those are players that are going to often make immediate impacts, but it was too late to get those guys. It was far too late to add anything meaningful in the transfer portal. I believe the portal was still open, and that's all funky stuff. And Georgia State guys could leave, but because the coach left. But that doesn't mean that guys are allowed to come in because the coach left.
But it was all post like spring game stuff, right? So
yes, leading up to the spring game, if I recall correctly, they didn't even play the spring game. They pushed it back like a month and a half. But again, it was very, very late in the offseason. And Dell McGee comes in through his first year. I've got it pulled up. Again, relying on Phil Steele's book, we're going to reference it a lot just because it is the closest thing to an encyclopedia you can get for college football. They were 3-9 last year, 1-7 in conference. That means they were the worst in the East, only better than Southern Miss, who went 1-11 in the West. And other than Vanderbilt, not a ton of wins to hang your hat on. Vanderbilt was week 4.
A great win in hindsight.
Oh, great win in hindsight. But the other two wins, Chattanooga, Tennessee Chattanooga, and then your only conference win came late in the season against a skidding Texas State team. So a disappointing start. But you then, going into the offseason, it was, all right, well, Dell McGee, this is what you're hired for. As you talked about, Brian, the opportunity to recruit guys. This is only his second year. This is realistically only his first recruiting class. So we're still probably a year and a half, 2 years away from the guys Dell McGee brings in from the high school level, really impacting this team. But he did get a couple notable transfers. And as we go position by position, we'll touch on a couple of those guys. Realistically, you can only go up with one conference win coming against at that point, playing fairly poorly Texas State team. Georgia State has nowhere to go but up. Per Phil Steele, they returned 6 offensive starters and 4 defensive starters. And just from a very high level, Georgia State's outlook from my perspective is offensively experienced, offensively has some guys that could be really big difference makers. I think quarterback is still a big question mark as it was last year, but skill positions I feel relatively comfortable. And offensive line has been, as it has been in the past several years, very strong. Defensively, shaky. That was an issue last year. The defense was shaky. Didn't stock up on a ton of other guys. But as you look at the starters, again, as they're projected by Phil Steele, some guys that I really liked last year that weren't necessarily starters last year or played more diminished roles, were technically starters in title, but played relatively diminished roles. So, I don't want to get into schedule quite yet, but I think Georgia State projects as a 5-win team this year. I think they could maybe go 500. I find it unlikely that they shoot any higher than that, higher than 6 wins. But this is a rebuilding program that's early. And so you have to look at everything with this team through that lens.
Yeah, I mean, if we're going to start from the most important position on the offensive side of the ball and the position that touches the ball literally every single play other than center. Christian Valaire, frankly, didn't give me a lot to kind of hope for. Like, it didn't seem like he was progressing as the season went on last year. It kind of seemed like it was just kind of the same the whole year, and it wasn't great.
Right.
I specifically remember a couple of games in the middle of the season, Georgia Southern being a perfect example where, I mean, I watched that game closely, obviously, because I went to Georgia Southern, huge fan, and all that stuff. But it was just like feast or famine. Like, either he was going to hit a long ball down the field or he was going to throw some of the worst passes you've ever seen. And frankly, until I still feel like now he could come out and be a totally different quarterback this year. However, the chances of that happening are between slim and none to me.
Right.
Guys typically don't go into an off season looking horrible and then come out and look like, you know, they don't do the Josh Allen thing. Like, you're a Bills fan. They don't do the thing where they go from guy couldn't hit water if he fell out of a boat to, oh, look, he completes 70% of his passes and he has a 3-to-1 touchdown to interception ratio. That just like typically doesn't happen, especially at the college, like G5 level. So
right.
I don't know if I'm going to bring this up because this was a big, obviously, storyline for last year. I don't know if you guys have somebody with the Braylon Braxton potential where you just have somebody waiting in the wings that could take over and like make a push to start. Is it confirmed that Valaire is like the entrenched starter, or is there like a competition in camp?
I have not heard either way, but the lack of conversation around there being competition makes me think it's going to be Christian Valaire. The only other guys on roster that could really compete, you get PJ Hatter from Texas State, who, from what I recall, didn't obviously never played at Texas State behind two really good quarterbacks, but really he was liked within that program from what I recall. I don't want to, hang my hat on that.
He, as far as I remember last year, did not even play when what's his name? What was the McLeod? Was even like when he was banged up last year, he wasn't even in the 3 quarterback rotation at Texas State. It was Martinez would play, and then they would get Brad Jackson, who was a freshman, reps over. I don't remember ever seeing Hatter take a snap last year. So, and I watched a decent bit of Texas State because I feel like they would be put on those like island games where it would be like, they love to stagger the Sun Belt games like on ESPN Plus.
Yeah.
They would be like the 5:00 game where you're like, okay, so whatever is wrapping up at noon and another game starts at 7:30. Let me just cut on Sam Houston and Texas State or whatever and see, and or whoever, or they would get a Thursday night game. But I just don't remember him even being kind of in the mix. So he might be an answer for Georgia State. Are they going to win the conference the way that Marshall did with Braylon Braxton? Probably not. So
it is Valaire. There is one other guy in contention that I actually think. I don't think my understanding is that he's not competing for any jobs right now. But Cameron Brown, transferred from Texas Tech. He is originally from Georgia and started his football career at West Georgia, which is, I think, Division II, maybe Division III. And
I think it's
those.
2.
Okay. There are several guys on this roster that we're going to point out throughout this episode of guys that Dell McGee liked you. That's why you're here. Dell McGee met you at some point when he was at Georgia. You probably didn't have the chops to be a Georgia Bulldog at the time, but you are clearly someone that he trusts. Cameron Brown is a guy like that. I still think it's Christian Valaire. Even though he never really got the full vote of confidence, as he only took about 60% of snaps at quarterback last year. The other, I guess it would have been 2/3. The other third went to Zach Gibson, who had himself come from Georgia Tech, as Haynes King rose and took over Georgia Tech football and has done excellent things there. Cameron Brown, though, is a guy, I believe he's a junior. If Valaire struggles at any point, or if I miss news about a QB competition, he's someone I think that Dell McGee could give a vote of confidence. Ultimately, though, Christian Valaire, prototype guy, not mobile like Darren Granger was, does not project as a conference winning quarterback. That brings us.
He's not. Yeah. He's not going to be one of the high-end starters of the conference. We're not going to be looking back, I feel like, toward the end of the year. If they win, let's put it this way. If they win, I almost feel like it's going to be in spite of him.
Oh, so, yeah. It's going to be one of those things, which is disappointing because that rolls us into the guys he's going to throw to, which is headlined by Ted Hurst, who was a guy that frankly came out of nowhere, at least in my perspective on it, because there were guys on this roster, Georgia State roster, that had a little more brand recognition, especially if you were around the program. Josias Creedle was one of them. Talik Williams was another one. Two guys that I thought were going to be the 1-2 in this post-Sam Pinckney era of Georgia State receivers. But it was Ted Hurst, who ended the year with 56 catches, 961 yards. He led the team with 9 touchdowns. That's not just 9. He led them in receiving or rushing touchdowns with 9.
Second team all Sun Belt.
Yeah, I mean he was a bona fide stud, and this was my fault. Came out of nowhere. Was not on my radar to start the year, and absolutely tore it up. Outside of him, it's a fairly thin class. As we look at who Phil Steele projects to take those snaps at kind of wide receiver 2 and wide receivers 3, it's DJ Riles, who did nothing. He was a depth guy last year. He stuck around, so they must like him enough. And then you're also looking at Leo Blackburn, who played 9 games last year at Georgia Tech, but didn't do a ton. Ted Hurst, I think, is probably going to be by volume the best receiver in the conference this year, just because of the feast or famine that's around him. There's no one else that's going to take his volume. This isn't going to be a South Alabama of 2022 and 2023 when they were force feeding their guys for 90 catches a year. But I mean, Ted Hurst in his second year here, I anticipate 70 catches, 1,000 yards, easy. Do you have any questions about that room? Is there anything that you're wondering before we move on from that?
I mean, Leo Blackburn's got some nice sides to him, I would say, as a big body kind of X receiver, if they deploy him in that way, 6'5", 220. So that's interesting because, again, I alluded to it earlier. Valaire's not the most accurate passer I've ever seen in my entire life. So hopefully that increased catch radius might help him out a little bit. But we've been burned on these, we love Phil Steele, but we've been burned kind of on these depth chart projections before where it's like they're listed as the second or third receiver, and then the guy finishes with 170 yards receiving for an entire season. So we are doing our best here. Obviously we won't know until they put the helmets and the pads on. Ted Hurst also nice tall target, 6'3", 185. Yeah, I think it's going to be. You mentioned South Alabama of years past. There was a year where they basically had, and it might have been last year, I can't remember. All these years are starting to run together for me. But there was a year where they basically had one volume receiver, and then it was just kind of everybody else. And I kind of think that that's what we're going to get here is where did Ted Hurst, when you watched them, did Ted Hurst line up in the slot, or was he an outside kind of receiver?
No, I mean, he's a burner. He's a burner. And I think that makes Leo Blackburn interesting in that they're both very tall, but in different ways. One is your big body, broadly speaking, Calvin Johnson type, jump ball type guy that can make a catch over anyone, whereas Ted Hurst is more in that Jamison Williams is a recent comp, where you're a skinny 6'3", 6'4", that runs, a 4.2, 4.3. So I think that there are going to be a couple games. If these are the three they run with Riles, Hurst, and Blackburn is going to have the opportunity to lead the team in receiving a couple games. But ultimately, Hurst is very much a out, a typical Y as opposed to your X, but he doesn't have the strength to move inside.
Okay.
Someone else in that room I do have to give a shout out to is Jalen Marshall. You're not going to see him on the Phil Steele page because he's in real small print, but he spent the last 2 years at Shorter University, which is one of the schools that I cover in my job now. So that's really cool to see him move up from D2 Shorter up to Division I and the FBS. That's really really awesome. Congratulations to him. The others, I'm sorry.
No, I was going to transition to the running back position because your boy, Freddie Brock, has departed now. Freddie Brock, who obviously you were very, very high on, and frankly, Matt and I were a little baffled by it, some of the previews and picks that you made.
Yeah.
Most notably, again, Georgia Southern, where you were like, he's going to crush him, and it was like 38 yards on 10 carries. But so talk to me a little bit about, who is it? Jordan Simmons is the guy that projects as the starter at the running back spot. Kind of talk to me a little bit about the running back room and kind of what you anticipate there.
So it's completely retooled, for one. As you look at the Phil Steele book, or just look at whoever is recording your stats, you'll see the top 3 running backs from last season all gone: Freddie Brock, Michael Dukes, Sivion Wilkerson. I am going to deviate from the Phil Steele book here, though, because I think the top running back in this room is Branson Robinson. This is certainly a little bit of bias, but Branson Robinson transferred in from the University of Georgia. He is obviously intimately familiar with Dell McGee. He was coached by Dell McGee. He played a very good depth role for the Georgia Bulldogs in over the past couple years. But never, that's a running back contender, so it's tough to break out in that room. I think Branson Robinson takes the majority of these touches. He's very much a power back guy. As I look at him, he's listed 5'10", 220. So, I mean, he is very much a power between the tackles, gonna run you over guy. That differs in the style of Freddie Brock, who is a very high average per carry. He averaged 5.4 yards per carry last season, and added a fair bit in the passing game as well, with 21 catches, 166 yards, and was the, make sure I'm counting that right, 6th leading receiver on the team last year. So Freddie Brock, more of a 3-down guy. Branson Robinson, probably not on the field for 3rd and medium, 3rd and longs. But that's where I'm going to deviate most from Phil Steele as we talk about the Panthers. Is I think Branson Robinson has the potential to be an 900 yard guy. I saw him several years at Georgia. I'm trying to make sure I've got his numbers from last year correct. Does he have it here? No. But anyway, that's where I look. But ultimately, from an offensive perspective, this is the weakest group. Whereas Ted Hurst leads a group of C-tier receivers, at least as we look at it preseason. Ted Hurst is a A-tier receiver leading a bunch of C-tiers. Branson Robinson or whoever is probably a B- leading a group of C-tiers. This is not going to be the Georgia State team that has had excellent running backs in the past. This is, I think, their offensive line, which we'll touch on briefly in a moment, is strong enough to block for a guy to rush for 900 yards. But Branson Robinson behind him, no matter how high you rate him, it's pretty thin.
So I haven't prepped you for this question, and I apologize. I should have said something in the kind of before we started recording. So you can, I assume you don't have a lot to say about the tight end position. So I just want to kind of put all of this in one box for you. Obviously, Georgia State coming into, or at the end of this last previous recruiting cycle, had a very good, at least what was on paper projected it to be a very good recruiting class. Again, the rating systems for the Sun Belt and G5 in general are just all over the place. Like it really, your team is favored basically if you have somebody running like your 24/7 page, because On3 does a fine-ish job, but they don't have enough bodies, to be quite honest, to cover all of the G5, and ESPN couldn't care less. Like, if you're not in the top 25 recruiting classes in the country, you might as well not exist to them. So, my question to you is there maybe anybody that's coming in from last year's or this previous recruiting class that was supposedly very solid from McGee's perspective that you think might make a push to for some playing time? Because as you said, it's like Ted Hurst, a bunch of dudes body wise in the running back room. We haven't touched on the tight end position, but I don't see anything there that makes me think that this guy's going to have 800 yards receiving this year. So is there anybody that's incoming maybe as like a freshman that you'd be like, all right, maybe there's something there? Or do you think these guys just simply need a little bit more seasoning before we get there?
I'm going to shoot you straight. I don't think so. We're at a level of football, and this is a broad statement, but true freshmen don't take over in the Sun Belt like they might maybe in the SEC and the Big Ten. That's just the consequence of playing at this level. You get less blue chips, you get less red chips, you get less any chips. You're looking for guys that prototype well. You look for guys that have high ceilings and have a floor. So, someone that can be a good football player for you. So there's no one in the incoming recruiting class that I super love. There are a handful of guys. Frankly, a lot of them left, but there's still a handful of guys that last year were freshmen or redshirt freshmen that played really well, more particularly on the defensive end. There's one guy in the defensive back group that I really liked and didn't get a ton of tick last year, and I thought he deserved more. But ultimately, what Georgia State is hanging its hat on, if it wants to be a competitive team this year, is the transfer class. And again, that's just kind of ultimately a consequence of modern football.
Sure. All right. So let's transition to the offensive line here. This is kind of going to be the backbone of this team if they are going to keep Valaire both clean, if they're going to be able to run the football, if they want to get obviously Ted Hurst involved in the passing game. Again, Valaire needs time because he's not one of the elite processors at the position, to be quite frank. And I think that some of their problems last year came from him feeling pressure, whether it be actually there or whether it was all in his head and it had kind of gotten to him. I felt like that was sort of the reason why he felt like he was rushed in his decision making and made some frankly bad throws, bad decisions, things like that. So talk to me a little bit about the offensive line and kind of who you think the difference makers up here might be.
Yeah, so this group lost a lot of talent. Trevor Timmons was a guy I think he played mostly on the right as a tackle that is no longer at Georgia State, and that's a huge loss. I thought he was excellent last season. The other tackle, Chukwema, one of those names that always trips you up, was also excellent. You're only really returning one starting offensive lineman. However, the guys that are coming back in were starters elsewhere, which gives me hope. The biggest thing for me when evaluating offensive lines is going to be experience starting. It really just college football experience. You need size. It's one of those positions that size does matter. And as you get older, as you transition from an 18-year-old to a 22-year-old, that's going to play a big deal. Alec Johnson is the only returning Georgia State starter. He was the center. He started last year as a freshman and did pretty well. That's a very difficult position to start as a freshman. If you're seeing a freshman start on the O-line, it's usually at the guards. They're not big enough typically to play tackle, and they're certainly not cerebral enough to play in the middle as a center. So that's very promising, having a young guy that was center ready, start ready out of there. You get Tyler Williams, last year starter at Akron, and DeAndre Duffus, who didn't play a ton but does come from Maryland as your two guards. Darrell Bailey from East Tennessee He was a starter there. And then Obadiah Obasuri, who did not play at NC State. Again, this is a fresh group, but I am very encouraged, especially by the three interior guys, all playing very large roles last year as starters. It's Alec Johnson, though. You ask who's the impact guy, it's Alec Johnson. I don't know the number, but there are not many teams in the country with sophomore starting centers. That really, really impresses me. And he's a guy who, if this program keeps, will be a first-team Sunbelter, if not by the end of this year, by the end of next year.
Yeah. I could totally see that. You're dead on about the center position. If you've got a young guy playing at the center spot, typically they've got to be special, or they have to be way ahead of the game, like mentally, to kind of handle. I assume at the college level, I know the way it works at the pro level. I assume at the college level, they're the ones that are setting protections, calling out blitzes, all of that sort of stuff. So yeah, if you see a young guy starting at center, they have to be legit. So I don't really have a problem with you calling out like he's going to be an all conference selection probably sooner than later. Yeah, I would say I'm sure you might agree with this, might not. I think the left tackle spot, the fact that Obasuri hasn't really played, that might be a little bit of a cause for concern. He's got a good build for the left tackle spot. I think he's 6'6", 320. But yeah, that lack of, you just never know what you're going to get with that lack of experience at the college level. So we'll have to see kind of what happens there. And like I said, hopefully between play calling and Valaire's just decision making, hopefully they try to make it as easy as possible on guys like that and don't make them try to hold up protection 6, 7, 8 seconds when in reality it should kind of be like 1, 2, 3, get rid of it. So we'll see about that. So let's move to the defensive side of the ball. This was frankly, it was a disaster last season. I mean, from my perspective, like I don't know how many games we recapped, and you were kind of just being like, yeah, I agree. They don't really didn't have any difference makers at the defensive, any defensive positions really. This looked like a vintage, not last year, but in years past, a vintage like Arkansas State situation where it's like there might be one guy here that does something, but there's 10 other guys that just kind of exist on the field. Right. So is it kind of the same? I know you talked about it being a little rough. Is it kind of the same this year? Do you kind of anticipate that they're going to keep building towards something?
I mean, it's going to be how good are these guys transfer wise that are coming in, and can they tide you over until somebody real comes through? There were a lot of disappointing players defensively. Kevin Swint is probably the most so. Homerism aside, I anticipated him to have a great year coming off the edge, but ended up with only 4.5 sacks and 48 tackles. Kenyatta Watson was disappointing. Gavin Pringle, who had a good year, was disappointing. Isaiah Guy, who had a good year, was disappointing. No one really took a big step forward. And bright side, all those guys that didn't take a step forward are no longer here. Downside, all those guys that were here, no longer here. So I think the two guys, or three rather, that I really want to point to defensively, Funches Lewis and Henry Bryant are two. They're not necessarily returning starters, but are two returning players. Bryant was more so a starter, but they both play interior defensive line. Funches Lewis, more of a nose guard type, but they both are sub 300, both a smidge over 6 feet. So they're more so 3 techs than 1 techs. Although again here, Phil Steele lists Funches Lewis as a nose. And then you get Damian Wilson, who was he's probably going to be one of the better middle linebackers in the conference. Last year with Marquez Watson-Trent at Southern, obviously. And then it was at Jason. I'm blanking on his name from Old Dominion. Henderson, yes. From Old Dominion. There were some incredible stand-up linebackers in the conference last season, but with all those guys gone now, I think Damian Wilson has the opportunity to be a very good stand-up linebacker for this team. He's got a great ball sense. He's a great tackler. I've long said that, and will till my deathbed say that tackles are a circumstantial stat, but you still have to make said tackles, and that's what he impresses with the most, per me and other folks. I like him, and I think he could make a big impact. Another person that I thought, I don't think I would have projected him to be a starter at the end of last season, but I did like, it's Sham Diagne, who is a corner. He is, make sure I get his height, he's 6'3", 207, right? So he profiles more as a almost like a nickel guy, but he does play like a traditional corner role for this team. He was very good in coverage, and at that size, it's hard not to be a very good tackler as a defensive back. Again, maybe he plays some sort of tweener into a nickel or tweener into a safety role, but that's another guy that didn't play a ton last year, and I thought was probably still a year away from starting. But Phil Steele here pegs him as a starter on their depth chart, and is someone that I think could be a real impact maker.
So one of the things too that Phil Steele points out is that they have a new defensive coordinator, an inexperienced secondary, which you touched on. One of the things that I guess we should have touched on when we talked about the offensive section, but we could talk about it now.
Oh, yeah.
They have two new coordinators, both on offense and defense. I'm going to drop like a not so hot take on you. I think Hue Jackson as offensive coordinator is going to be terrible. Like,
it's hard to disagree, man.
Yeah. He built up so much goodwill. It felt like in the mid thousands in the NFL, like he was the guy before Eric Bieniemy and everybody pointing to him and going, that guy should be a head coach. It was Hue Jackson. Everybody was like, this guy's great. He's got an offensive mind for the game. Like, he should get a shot. Got a shot with the Raiders. Fine-ish, but the Raiders were an absolute travesty toward the end of Al Davis's life. I mean, they hired like Lane Kiffin when he was like 28 years old for one season. Like, they were just throwing stuff at the wall and hoping something stuck. And then to get into the Cleveland tenure, I mean, 1-31 as a head coach, had one of the 2 0-16 seasons in NFL history, and I think it showed what the entire coaching world around football, pro, college, D1, D2, FCS, whatever, thought about him, that it was like the only opportunities there were really, other than holding Marvin Lewis's headset for like half a season in Cincinnati before he got canned, was working at the FCS, like HBCU level. So I'm going to really... I know expectations weren't super high for the offense, but between what I saw from Valaire last season, and Hue Jackson coming in, I'm really tempering expectations here. Like, I hope that it's not this, but it might have been like Dell McGee being like, hey, this is a good buddy of mine. Let's get him a job.
Yeah.
And I would hate to see that.
So Hue Jackson came to the program after Dell McGee was hired, but before the season started, and he was entitled the assistant general manager. What that means, not quite sure. I don't think anyone really knows.
Roster management, basically.
Yeah.
Transfers, stuff like that.
Cool. That's awesome. Dell McGee, when he picked his coordinators, before Hue Jackson was a part of the program, he picked Jim Chaney, who had come over from Texas A&M, if I remember correctly. Chaney's still with the team, but is now an analyst. So what went into that decision? Who knows? How much coaching input did Hue Jackson have? Not quite sure. It's easy to talk about, though, because Hue Jackson is one of the more dunkable names in all of football ever. It's like him, Jamarcus Russell. That might
Adam
be
Gase.
the top. Yeah, who else do you want to put on there? So it is one that does not inspire a world of confidence. However, I don't think that Hue Jackson is a guy you hire as when you already have an OC, you bring him in as the assistant GM. Like I'm willing to trust the process as a fan. I want to trust the process, which might be why I'm willing to as an outsider. But this could be a shipwreck. It could be.
When you said that sentence, Hue Jackson is not a guy you hire, I thought that was going to be the end of the sentence.
It probably should have been. Hue Jackson is not a guy you hire for his coaching pedigree or for his advanced schema. It's someone you hire because you like his experience. I mean, he is a very long tenured head coach, had success in college to some degree, was recently the head coach at Grambling, although that was short-lived. And if you can't cut it at Grambling, what are you doing? Yeah, so it's not a move that, again, inspires confidence, but I'm willing to trust the process there. As for the defensive coordinator, can't say I know much.
He's got a lot of experience as well at the defensive spots, especially in the Sun Belt. I believe he was the defensive coordinator at South Alabama for one season in 2014-15 is what it says in the magazine. And then most recently was the cornerbacks coach at Troy, kind of when they were making their run with John Summerall and all of those guys. So, I
think that's good. Having a DB guy is good. Last year, often I felt like they went. We talked about it a couple times where they went like weirdly soft, where they would play what looks like they should be hard zones, but then would be really soft, have some real squishy spots. So perhaps inspired by having a DB guy, Troy's turned out a couple of NFL DBs in the past several years. I think more than one. So I suppose, again, that's a pedigree pick. You're not getting the cream of the crop at this level. We'll find out. Coordinators were not the problem with this team last year, and I don't anticipate them being the problem with for this team this year either.
So let's wrap up here talking about the schedule. You said at the top you believed that they were a 5-win football team this year. Tell me what the 5 are that you think that they will win or have a solid chance to win. Because on first glance, it looks like a tough schedule, especially when you consider kind of the level of talent that they have as opposed to a lot of other teams in the conference. So tell me which ones you're pointing to and going, okay, let's put a pin in that one and come back to it.
Sure. I mean, starting off, Murray State is the only out-of-conference layup that I see. I think Memphis is possible. You upset Vandy at home, or I guess that's a weird phrase because when you say at home, well, who was at home? When Georgia State was at home, they upset Vandy last year, but now you travel for the back half of that away, home and home. I don't think you repeat that. JMU is an interesting game. I think shoot, I said 5 without having looked at their schedule.
If I had to get to 5, do you want me to give you which ones I would be looking at?
Let me give you my 5, and then I want to hear yours.
Okay, go ahead.
It's Murray State. It's Marshall.
Yep.
Coastal. It might just be Troy Old Dominion. It might be just a really good back half for this team if they reach 5. I freeballed 5, and I feel very bad about that number looking at it now. I was like, shoot, I forgot they have to play the other Sunbelt teams.
Right. You're like, what? They have to play the other Sunbelt teams? Where did this come from? No, the 5 that I was looking at on glance at the schedule, Murray State, South Alabama, because frankly, you never have any idea what you're going to get from them. Even outside of that one season where they were like 10-2, you truly like they might show up, they might not, and it's a home game on a Thursday night, a week before Halloween. So who knows? Coastal, because I believe, frankly, that their coach is a dead man walking. I think he's the new Will Hall, where everybody's just kind of sitting around being like, when's this guy going to get canned? Last year didn't go very well. I don't anticipate them getting much better. And again, when we have Phil Steele on the podcast, we'll talk to him about that, because we asked him about Will Hall last year and he was like, yeah, this isn't going to last very long. Marshall, like you said, totally retooling, new coach, everything. I don't think that that's going to be a recipe for a ton of success for them. Troy is kind of iffy. They seemed like they figured out their quarterback position at the end of last year. And they had a good win against Southern toward the end of the season. But again, you don't know. So let's see. Murray State, South Al, Coastal, Marshall, Troy would be my 5. If you put a gun to my head and said pick 5 wins off this schedule, those would be the 5 that I would look at, because frankly, outside of Murray State, like, there are a couple real shaky teams in the conference that I don't have a ton of faith in, let's just say. And I want to see it before I kind of say, oh no, definitively they're better than Georgia State.
Right. I think ultimately, as I said at the top, I mean, you just have to look at this team through the lens of a rebuild and through the lens of, we're waiting until recruiting, maestro Dell McGee's guys actually get in here. And we're still 2 years away from that, because he got such a late jump and did not get a recruiting class going into his initial year. So we're still 2 years away before we can really look at Dell McGee and evaluate his success here. It's a shaky start. It'll probably continue to be shaky. And if he wants to get to that 4-year mark, where this show is very adamant that you get 4 years before we can make any real calls. If he wants to even get to that 4-year mark, though, he's got to take a step forward this year. I think he's done a solid enough job retooling. The defense still scares me. But you have a couple of skill position guys, those being Ted Hurst, Branson Robinson, who I think I think Ted Hurst will finish with the most receiving yards in the conference this year. But outside of that, it's going to be shaky, man. It's going to be another long year.
Yeah. Also, maestro. What a pronunciation of that word.
Well, I wanted another word that started with R, but I couldn't find one quick enough. Pretty bummed about that.
I don't know if you listen to the Ringer fantasy football podcast, but they have a guy on there that notoriously mispronounces words, and it's hilarious because he'll say things like maestro, but he truly means it, and he's like, that's not how it's pronounced. So I didn't know if you were pulling a Danny Heifetz or not. But yeah, so that pretty much wraps up our preview of Georgia State. 4-5 win-ish team. Frankly, final thoughts here. I think Dell McGee, and I don't say this just because he had coached at Southern, I think with the circumstances around the Georgia State program and how he kind of came in and when all that happened, I think he deserves a little bit more runway than a lot of other coaches that get hired on a normal timeline and they have a job in December and they know, boom, boom, boom. He's sitting back, and then all of a sudden it's like he's hired. He's got to make a bunch of moves going into last season. He doesn't have a full recruiting cycle. I think year one was a wash because he was just kind of making it happen with who he had left. But if we find out by the end of the season that Christian Valaire is definitively not the answer, he's kind of got to answer for that, because if you're pulling a Clay Helton and you're just sticking with a guy just out of a misguided sense of loyalty, you can't, because it's going to end up people. I know that the fan base in Atlanta is not quite as passionate as a lot of the other fan bases around the conference, but people will show up with pitchforks if you keep running a guy out that is definitively like, you can't do this. You cannot keep running this guy out and hoping something different is gonna happen. So I'm very dubious of the Hue Jackson Valaire connection. I thought that instead of hiring Jackson, they should have done what we say a lot of times, especially me. I beat this drum a lot, where you go down to the FCS level, find whoever has the best offense, and offer them an FBS coordinator level paycheck to come import that offense, and then bring whoever they want over that wants to move up from the FCS. Because frankly, it's not like Georgia State. I know they've had some good recruiting classes. They're not exactly bursting with talent at the seams where they're like, hey man, we're just not going to find a roster spot for you. It's like, we could just take a fewer transfers and find a spot for someone else, if they came up from the FCS ranks. So that's kind of my overall thoughts on it. Low ceiling. We'll see if they surprise us. I'd be very surprised if they ended up even being kind of a middle tier team in the conference. I think there's still some really good talented teams. One of which we will come out with our episode on Thursday about not Georgia State. That's this one, Southern Miss, and all of the changes that they've made. How they've basically taken Huntington and ported it to Hattiesburg. So we'll talk a little bit about that in the episode that comes out later this week. But Zeke, do you want to give some final thoughts and as we wrap up here?
No, man. I think from a Georgia State perspective, as I said, just hold on to your hats and bear the rebuild as long as you can. Season wise, or I guess, tease the next episode. Yeah. The Southern Miss Thundering Herd are probably the most top to bottom talented team in the conference. They get the best quarterback in the conference. They get what was the best coach in the conference last year. So that'll be a really fun one to talk about and contrast how a team that I have never once said a single good thing about in my life, on or off air, will probably make a run for the conference title. So I'm excited to talk about that, and we're going to go ahead and record that right now and have that up Thursday. We hope to see you all there.
To tease it even further, Zeke, are we on Texas State watch with you as far as Southern Miss goes? Are we predicting a one-loss college football playoff contender here?
You'll have to find out Thursday.
Awesome. Well done. Zeke, do you want to go ahead and plug your socials before we get out, and then I'll do the same?
You can find me everywhere at Zeke Palermo, ZekePalermo. You can find our third co-host, Matt Miguez, at Miguez Matt, MiguezMatt. You can find the show at Warm Weather Fans, spelt just how you think it would be, and Brian will send us home.
Yeah, you can find me on most platforms at Watch the Stone. Feel free to send us emails, thoughts, questions. We would love to have a mailbag episode as we're cranking out these previews. Preview season has started. I know it's early. It seems like at the end of June. However, there's only a few real weeks through the rest of the month until, through July and August until, it's Labor Day weekend and we're in week 0, week 1, stuff like that. So thank you everybody for listening, and we will be back on Thursday to talk over Southern Miss and all of the changes with their program. This has been Warm Weather Fans, the Sunbelt Podcast.